Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface. And Father, in our last episode, we had a conversation about the need of being vulnerable to build better relationships, which is the calling and the need of all of us. And in that conversation, we pointed out some important things. A, there is a need to be trusting of each other, and vulnerability will spur trust. I offered you something that could have potentially hurt me and you didn't. That's a form of building trust. And I wanted to have a conversation that is unique to us in this moment of time. And quite frankly, probably a problem that's not going to slow down anytime, which is we have the ability, unlike any generation before in mankind history, to present ourselves and our vulnerabilities to essentially an infinite crowd through what we can do with our phones. And there is almost an expectation that we do that, even though there's no basis behind it. And I'm just got this statistic that's a little bit dated because it's from 2 years ago, and I don't know the updated one since. But there's an impression that your life needs to be on either Facebook or Twitter, and you're constantly giving opinions about things. And if you're not condemning someone that's being condemned by the people who are your supporters, you're doing it wrong. You're not being a member of the team or what have you. And I bring out this statistic that less than 2% of the country's population is active on Twitter. So you don't have to do that, just to let people know up front. People who see one statement that they don't like, that feel, not only do I need to reply to it, I need to create an internet mob to get after you. So I bring this up because we are in a situation where people are incredibly torn. You know, at the one hand, there's this sense of requirement, if you will, if that's even the right word, to be vocal on the internet and constantly being out there in terms of what you believe is the righteous action to do. Whereas on the other hand, does it make a difference? I think it's a valid question. But is it even right to expect that of yourself, and does it do anything? And I bring all that up in the conversation that we were having with vulnerability, because what I see as a conclusion, or at least an option, is maybe I just don't do anything online and I distance myself from all of the various networks. But the reason most people join them in the first place is to avoid this isolation trap. You know, really, it's the only way I see my kids that are 3 states away is through the pictures that they put up. You know, it's the only way as a parent I really know what they're doing when they go out on Friday night. But every time I'm on one of these platforms, it just, ugh. So I think everyone knows what I'm trying to articulate, Father. And that's the challenge of now. And again, probably not going to diminish. But I wanted to bring it up because I think it's something that's very real in our world and something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah. And as you speak, some authors and there's actually a fair amount, maybe growing literature in these areas. I really appreciate Brene Brown on anything that comes to vulnerability, and she, as a sociologist, who's focused a lot of energy around shame, vulnerability, empathy, and then the impact that has on so many areas of life, really has so many good things to say. And then also a nice book by Andy Crouch called Strong and Weak had some nice insights that I really appreciated. A simple insight from him that I think can provide an idea to address some of the points that you're making is this. He says we often put strong and weak on the same spectrum, the same line. One side is strong, the other side is weak. But he said, actually, it would be more accurate to make it a 2x2 grid. So a degree of our weakness and the degree of our strength. And the optimal place is the upper right, so strong and weak. and he moves through what those different things look like when we are just weakness and bury all of our strength, when we are just strength and bury all of our weakness, or when we are neither strong nor weak, which is kind of incapacitated. And anyway, he also defines vulnerability as exposure to meaningful risk. And so there's a kind of weird way that posting something on Facebook is in one way not vulnerable, because all I'm doing is putting it on a screen right in front of me. I used to say also, when I was sitting in a radio studio, I don't do quite as much radio work as I used to, but I would sit there and just talk to a microphone. You know, that's all that I was doing. And the microphone listened to everything I said, and it wasn't going to contradict me. And, so there is a little bit of a cognitive disconnect, some cognitive dissonance between the fact that I'm actually doing something that's not vulnerable, talking to a microphone, and something that's profoundly vulnerable, talking to thousands of people at the same time. But I don't see them. I don't see them on Facebook, and I don't see them on the radio when I'm doing the revelation that is actually really vulnerable. So that's one of the things. If I had those crowds of people standing in front of me, even still, there's a way that the crowd has a collective personality that makes it not seem, as personal. And so it would be different, to be naked in front of a crowd or naked on a screen. And I mean that emotionally or psychologically or potentially physically, but than it is to be naked in front of one person, exposed, vulnerable before one person who actually knows me and is watching, listening, paying attention. So, yeah, there's some weird things, like our psychology wasn't designed for some of this stuff. I mean, I think that is part of the problem. And then there's another way, and this is the kind of thing that Brene Brown and Andy Crouch talk about really well. And I'm not sure I'll be able to speak about it as concisely or insightfully as they do, but there's a way that kind of vulnerability is its own kind of defense. Although I'm exposing really personal things, I'm doing it in kind of an aggressive way in which you're not allowed to disagree. And then I'm maybe not even taking in your feedback. So, it becomes a kind of flame war back and forth, and I just turn off all negative comments. And so there's a kind of aggressive self-revelation that looks like the same content as vulnerability. But again, it's a little bit like, I have to be really careful about how I say these things. Something like pornography, that, as they say, the problem with it is not that it shows too much, but that it shows too little. So you see too little of the heart. You see too little of the things that are actually precious in someone's life. You might have a lot of things splayed out on the screen that they've learned to just put out there, but you're not really seeing the heart. You're not really seeing the tender side of the person. You're not really seeing the dreams and hopes. You're not seeing the most fragile things that they're really afraid to have lost or broken, which they may not even be in touch with themselves. And so anyway, there's a lot of dynamics like that are going on in social media, from not being really aware of how many people are reading this or who is reading this, to not actually revealing the most vulnerable things, although they are kind of racy content. So anyways, a number of different things at work in that.
Yeah, and it's something that, as I'm like, so obviously I'm trying to figure out this whole revelation of life too. I mean, this is something that didn't exist whenever I was growing up. It's here now. and there's a lot of people that I guess what I'm trying to get to with the heart of what I'm trying to ask here is, there are many people, as we discussed here, that are so in need of a connection that they'll go to areas of putting themselves completely out there and just hoping to get a reaction. To a degree, whether it's just putting something out there that we know is going to get a bunch of negative comments, because at least I'm talking to someone. Someone is at least engaging with me. And that, to that individual, becomes satisfying nourishment, on that emotional level, But if we were looking at it from a nutrition standpoint, we would say that's empty calories. It's the equivalent of eating McDonald's every day. And we can see this from being outside of the scenario and looking at it. But there are many people that get caught inside this vortex and they get emotionally drained and angry and all this other stuff that happens as a result of that. And it doesn't really make a difference at the end of the day. You know, you look at some of the people who do this, like politicians, for instance, they don't change. They are what they are. And there's just so much anger that's caused back and forth from everyone involved. What do you say to someone like that who's essentially in this modality of creating controversial content just for the purpose of a response, because that is satisfying to them? How do you address that?
Well, I only know how to, I guess I shouldn't say that. I most often address things at a personal level, and, being able to look at something together and then, with love and gentleness, to be curious about, what were you hoping, what kinds of responses were you hoping for from that? And like, what are you getting from putting that up? And maybe you're hoping for the negative responses or the controversy. Yeah, it's like, I think there's often a little child in us that gets buried beneath sort of stronger external behaviors. And that's kind of Andy Crouch's point with the strong and weak. We can end up putting strong stuff forward, even stuff that says, again, sort of racy things that would be vulnerable for one person, but they're not as vulnerable for the person who can just kind of stick them out there and to get all kinds of reactions. It's a kind of the opposite of voyeurism. Anyway, revealing too much and just kind of seeking some kind of attention. But it's, helping someone to get in touch with what their motivations are behind those kinds of behaviors and what they're hoping to get out of them and what it feels like to then get some of those reactions. And pressing into some of that space is, it requires a lot of trust, because that's vulnerable to actually talk about what the motivation is and to get inside of where someone's heart is. Takes a lot of trust to reveal that, even to themselves, and a lot of times the way that our psyche works is we're not even in touch with our own vulnerable parts, the vulnerable areas of our heart. And we're acting out of defenses, protectors. We're acting out of certain kinds of feedback loops and self-seeking behaviors of one kind or another. I mean, we can get stuck in some of those patterns. And even to let down our guard to look at ourselves honestly can be a real challenge. But we do that best in trusting relationships, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things to recognize, is that we don't know ourselves kind of what's always going on. So therefore, how can you judge someone else if we don't know ourselves what's going on? How could you possibly do that from an outside perspective? But there's also an element that says, at some point you may recognize that this isn't worth it, or what it is that I want to do. And how do we be gentle and open to stopping and saying, in some ways, I've almost made myself into a character that people expect me to do this, but I realize it's not who I want to be. This character I've made isn't there. How do we be gentle enough with ourselves to change and to realize that we might be going into a space of being alone, knowing how contrary that is to the needs of people?
Well, if I imagine that there's a part of me that's doing this kind of to use a term, like attention-seeking behavior or something, and that's posting or is caught up in the expectations and what people are going to say or what they're going to think of me, and trying to play into that space. And I just ask that part of me, ask myself, what am I afraid will happen if I don't do that? And a lot of times that exposes the deeper fear, pain, insecurity, loneliness, whatever the thing is underneath that's kind of driving the external behavior. Sometimes we can expose it by trying to ask ourselves with, again, gentleness and compassion. It's the only way to approach these things. If we beat up the parts of us that are beating up other things, then we just end up with a lot of other stuff, problems, tangled mess. But just to ask, what am I afraid would happen if I stopped this behavior? If I took a day off, if I took a rest, what am I afraid will? And then a lot of times, maybe it's, well, nobody will pay attention to me. I'll be left all alone. Or, then I won't have anything to contribute. My life will be meaningless. I don't know that I have any good desires or any good dreams. Those are the kinds of things that might emerge if we gave them space to, and there could be some real pain there. And then that's the kind of thing that if we can bring it into relationship and share that with somebody who loves us unconditionally, who will be with us. And a lot of times we are surrounded by those people and we've kind of kept them at arm's length. We never let them into those spaces. We sort of control some of the aspects of the relationship, and to just vulnerably say, when I look at stopping this behavior, I'm really afraid nobody will pay attention to me. My life won't have any value. I won't, I'll be left all alone. And then to hear from somebody say, no, that's not true. I never leave you. I'm always here with you. I'm not going anywhere. You're valuable to me. You're a gift to me, not because of what you do or because of all these posts, but because of who I know you are as I see your heart, So that's a path to, certain behaviors and some healing and growth in those areas.
Well, Father, I certainly appreciate you answering the questions here and going into it. I hope that it helps a lot of people out there. And as always, we'll be with you guys here again next week.